The hospital room was a sterile cocoon, filled with the low hum of machines and the rhythmic beeping that punctuated the stillness. Nathaniel lay unconscious in the center of it all, his once commanding presence diminished to a frail silhouette beneath the crisp white sheets. A tangle of wires and tubes snaked around his body, each connected to the machines that tirelessly monitored his vital signs. His face, usually so sharp and defined, appeared softened and pale, a stark contrast to the vibrant life he had once led. Outside the room, two nurses stood in hushed conversation, their voices barely audible over the mechanical sounds. "They say it was a bad accident," one nurse remarked, shaking her head. "The car flipped 3 times before it hit the tree. It's a miracle he survived at all." The other nurse nodded, her brow furrowed with concern. "But the prognosis isn't good. They're saying he might not wake up. The family is devastated. He was such a powerful man." As they spoke, flashes of Nathaniel's life flickered through the air like a montage of a film. Lavish parties held in grand ballrooms, luxury cars gliding through the streets, and the sharp clink of champagne glasses in posh restaurants. Nathaniel was a titan in the business world, known for his ruthless strategies and impressive wealth. He was a man who thrived in the spotlight, and now he lay shrouded in darkness, teetering on the edge of life and death. Within the confines of his mind, a different world unfolded. Nathaniel's subconscious stirred, battling through the fog of his coma. He could feel the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, each choice echoing through the corridors of his memory. He had spent years building an empire, but the cost had often been steep. Friends had turned into enemies, loyalty was fleeting, and the people closest to him had often betrayed him in pursuit of their gain. Now, as he floated between realms, he felt an urge to make a final choice, one that could alter the course of his legacy. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Clara trudged through her own mundane existence. A waitress at a local diner, she was accustomed to the clatter of plates and the constant murmur of conversations around her. The smell of greasy food clung to her clothes as she navigated through the crowded space, her mind racing with thoughts of bills, rent, and the ever-present shadow of financial instability. Each night, she slipped on her apron with a sigh, feeling the weight of her responsibility settle onto her shoulders like a heavy cloak. "Clara, table 7 needs refills," called out her manager, snapping her back to reality. She nodded, forcing a smile as she grabbed the coffee pot, her heart heavy with the daily grind. She loved her family fiercely, but the struggle to make ends meet often left her exhausted and yearning for something more. As she poured coffee into the mugs of her customers, her thoughts drifted to her dreams. Dreams of travel, of art, of a life where she didn't have to clock in and out, counting every penny just to survive. "Maybe someday," she whispered under her breath. But the words felt hollow. The diner was packed, and the same familiar faces came and went, each one a reminder of her stagnant life. She glanced out the window, taking in the view of the bustling city, where dreams seemed to flourish for some while remaining just out of reach for others. With every passing day, she felt more trapped in the cycle of work and exhaustion, her aspirations fading like a distant memory. In the depths of Nathaniel's mind, a decision began to form, spurred by the lingering echoes of his past. He envisioned Clara, not as a waitress, but as someone who could breathe new life into his legacy. An image of her came to him, her determination, the fire in her eyes when she spoke about her dreams, and the kindness she displayed to those around her. He felt a connection, perhaps born from the shared experience of struggling against circumstances. He began to construct a plan, one that would take a leap of faith into the unknown. "Who would I leave my empire to?" Nathaniel mused, his thoughts swirling. The faces of his business associates flashed through his mind, each one more self-serving than the last. No, he thought, they would only continue the cycle of greed and betrayal. But Clara could be different. She held an honesty that he had longed for in his life, a quality that had grown rare among his peers. "Yes," he murmured, a newfound resolve blossoming within him. "She would be my choice." As Clara cleaned up the last table, her mind was still racing with thoughts of her life, when suddenly a strange sensation washed over her. It was as if she could feel someone watching her, a presence that seemed to penetrate her routine. She shook her head, dismissing the feeling as exhaustion, but a flicker of curiosity ignited within her. What if there was more to life than what she was living? What if just maybe a spark of fate could intervene? While the world outside continued its relentless pace, Nathaniel's resolve solidified. He had made his choice, and it was time to act. In his mind, he envisioned the paperwork, the legalities, the transfer of power that would connect him to Clara, a stranger who would soon hold the reins of his legacy. He saw her stepping into his shoes, not just to manage his empire, but to infuse it with a breath of fresh air, a new perspective that he had long ago lost. "Clara," he whispered in the silence of his mind, as if summoning her spirit from the depths of her mundane life. "You will be my proxy. You will be the one to carry this torch." As the hospital machines continued their rhythmic beeping, Clara finished her shift and stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. She took a deep breath, inhaling the city's energy, feeling a flicker of hope igniting within her. Little did she know that the tides of her life were about to shift dramatically, intertwined with the fate of a man she had never met. In that moment, the stars twinkled overhead, and the universe seemed to conspire in silence, setting the stage for a remarkable twist of destiny that would soon unfold, forever altering the lives of both Nathaniel and Clara. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, the phone pressed tightly to her ear as she listened to the attorney's voice on the other end. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting a warm glow over the chaotic pile of bills and takeout menus that cluttered her nightstand. She felt as if the walls were closing in around her, the weight of the news pressing down on her chest. "Ms. Clara Sullivan?" the voice continued, firm yet measured. "I understand this is unexpected, but you have been named the temporary executor of Mr. Nathaniel Hartman's estate." The words hung in the air, thick with disbelief. "Executor?" Clara repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "I think you must have the wrong person." "No, ma'am. Mr. Hartman specifically mentioned you in his will. He believed you would bring a fresh perspective to his affairs." The attorney paused as if gauging her reaction. "I understand this is a lot to take in, but we need to discuss the logistics as soon as possible." Clara's mind raced, images of her mundane life flashing before her eyes. The cramped apartment, the endless shifts at the diner, her mother's disappointed sighs when she couldn't make rent. "Why me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just a waitress. I don't know the first thing about managing a fortune. Mr. Hartman saw potential in you, Clara. He admired your resilience. He believed you could handle this." The attorney's tone softened, almost sympathetic. "You have a chance to change your life, to make a difference." I need some time to think," Clara stammered, her heart pounding. "Can I call you back?" "Of course. But please consider the urgency of the situation. Mr. Hartman is in critical condition, and decisions need to be made." After hanging up, Clara dropped the phone onto her bed, her hands shaking. She ran her fingers through her hair, trying to make sense of it all. The notion of stepping into Nathaniel Hartman's world felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Could she really do this? What if she failed? As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara made a decision. She would meet with the attorney. She needed to understand what this entailed, to see the other side of the life she had always envied from afar. The next day, Clara stepped into the grand office of Hartman Enterprises, her heart racing as she crossed the threshold. The building was a stark contrast to her own life. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the air was filled with a subtle scent of expensive cologne. She felt completely out of place in her simple clothes, the weight of her own insignificance pressing down on her. "Ms. Sullivan," a voice called, pulling her from her thoughts. The attorney, Mr. Bennett, stood beside a sleek mahogany desk, his expression professional yet welcoming. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having me," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "Please, have a seat." He gestured toward an elegant chair, and Clara perched on the edge, her fingers clasped tightly in her lap. "I understand this is overwhelming, but I assure you, you're capable of handling this." The conversation flowed as Mr. Bennett explained the details of Nathaniel's estate, his vast investments, properties, and the various businesses under his control. Clara listened intently, absorbing every word, but a sense of dread settled in her stomach. It felt like a world she had only ever glimpsed through the lens of movies and magazines, a life so far removed from her own. "What if I mess up?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I don't know what to do?" "Clara," he said, leaning forward, "you are not alone in this. You will have access to a team of professionals who can assist you. Your primary role is to ensure Mr. Hartman's wishes are upheld and his interests protected during this time." She nodded, but doubts lingered in her mind. As they discussed the intricacies of Nathaniel's business empire, Clara felt a flicker of determination ignite within her. This was her chance, perhaps the only one she would ever get. She could make a difference, not just for herself, but for others as well. After their meeting, Clara left the office with a mix of excitement and anxiety coursing through her veins. She walked through the bustling city streets, the sounds of honking cars and chatter surrounding her. It was hard to reconcile the world she had just left behind with the one she was now stepping into. Back in her apartment, she spread out the documents Mr. Bennett had given her across the dining table. Each paper was a glimpse into Nathaniel's life, a life she had only ever seen from the outside. As she perused the financial statements and project proposals, she began to notice discrepancies. Figures didn't align, and certain entries seemed suspiciously out of place. "What the hell?" she muttered under her breath, her heart racing as she leaned closer to the pages. Was it possible that the great Nathaniel Hartman had been involved in something shady? She shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts swirling in her mind. This was just her inexperience talking, surely, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave her. Clara spent hours poring over the documents, her mind whirring as she tried to make sense of it all. With each passing moment, a sense of dread grew within her. The weight of her new responsibilities was heavier than she had anticipated, and the stakes felt higher than ever. The next day, Clara returned to the office, this time armed with more questions. "Mr. Bennett," she began, her voice steady, "I found some inconsistencies in the financial records. I think there might be something wrong." Mr. Bennett's brow furrowed, concern etched on his features. "What did you find?" Clara hesitated, unsure of how to articulate her concerns. "There are discrepancies in the investment reports, and some of the expenditures don't add up. I think we need to dig deeper." "You're right to be cautious," he replied, his demeanor shifting to one of seriousness. "I'll arrange for a forensic accountant to review these documents. It's important to get to the bottom of this." As she left the office that day, Clara felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth, but what if she was wrong? What if she was just reading too much into things? The thought gnawed at her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply amiss. Days turned into weeks as Clara delved deeper into Nathaniel's empire. She found herself awake late into the night, sifting through records and emails, piecing together a puzzle that felt increasingly complex. With every new revelation, she felt the weight of her role pressing down on her. But as she uncovered more discrepancies, the realization hit her. This wasn't just about Nathaniel's wealth or his empire. It was about ethics and morality. She was navigating a treacherous landscape filled with shadows and secrets, and the stakes were becoming far greater than she had ever anticipated. One evening, as she was preparing to leave the office, Clara received a call from Mr. Bennett. "Clara, we need to talk," he said, his tone grave. "Meet me at the cafe down the street." Her heart raced as she made her way to the cafe, anxiety tightening its grip on her. What could be so urgent? As she entered, she spotted Mr. Bennett sitting in a corner booth, his expression serious. "Clara," he said as she sat down, "I've spoken with the accountant. We've found some alarming information." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her voice shaking slightly. "There are indications of fraud within the company, and it appears some of Nathaniel's business partners may be involved." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Fraud? But how? Why would they do that?" "We're still piecing it together, but it seems there's a larger scheme at play. You need to be careful, Clara. If you're too close to this, You could be putting yourself at risk." The gravity of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. This was no longer just a job. It was a battle for truth in a world filled with deception. Clara felt a surge of determination mixed with fear, knowing she had to navigate this treacherous path with caution. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and she was now at the center of something much bigger than herself. Clara stood in the sleek, polished office of Nathaniel's business partner, Marcus, her heart racing. The plush leather chairs and expensive art on the walls screamed wealth and power, but all Clara felt was the weight of the responsibility resting heavily on her shoulders. She had spent the last few days poring over financial statements, piecing together clues that pointed towards something sinister lurking beneath the surface of Nathaniel's empire. And now, here she was, ready to confront the man who had been Nathaniel's right-hand man for years. As she took a deep breath, Clara reminded herself of the discrepancies she had uncovered. "I have to stay focused," she whispered to herself. With determination, she knocked on the office door. "Come in," Marcus's voice boomed from inside. Clara stepped in, her palms slightly clammy. Marcus was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, a confident smile plastered on his face. His tailored suit spoke of sophistication, but Clara sensed something more menacing in his demeanor. "Ah, Clara," he said, his tone deceptively warm. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need to talk to you about Nathaniel's finances," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've found some irregularities that I believe we need to address." Marcus's smile faltered for a brief moment, then returned with a hint of condescension. "Irregularities? My dear, you must understand that these things can often appear complicated to those not familiar with the intricacies of corporate finance." Clara pressed on, her resolve strengthening. "I've seen the records. There are large sums of money being funneled to accounts that don't seem to have any legitimate purpose. It looks like fraud." "Fraud?" Marcus laughed, a sound that sent a chill down Clara's spine. "You're simply out of your depth here, Clara. Nathaniel trusted me to manage the company, and I assure you, everything is perfectly legal." "Then why are there multiple transactions with no clear destination?" Clara shot back, feeling a surge of anger. "You can't just brush this off." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. "You should be careful, Clara. You're stepping into a world you know nothing about. Accusing someone like me without solid evidence could be dangerous." Clara felt the air thicken with tension. She had expected resistance, but the threat beneath his words was palpable. "I'm not afraid of you, Marcus. I'm here to protect Nathaniel's legacy, and I won't let you intimidate me." "Protecting Nathaniel's legacy?" Marcus scoffed. "You think you're qualified for that? You're playing a game far beyond your means, and it's best you remember your place." Clara turned on her heel, her heart pounding in her chest. She had stepped into a lion's den, but she refused to back down. As she exited the office, she could feel Marcus's eyes burning into her, a reminder that she was now a target in this high-stakes game. Later that evening, Clara found herself at a small cafe, her usual haunt after a long day. She sat across from her best friend, Sarah, who could see the worry etched on Clara's face. "Okay, spill it," Sarah said, leaning in. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's all so overwhelming, Sarah. I'm managing Nathaniel's estate, and I think his partner is involved in something illegal. I confronted him today, and he threatened me." "Threatened you?" Sarah's eyes widened. "What did he say?" "Just that I should be careful and that I'm out of my depth," Clara replied, her voice shaky. "I don't know if I can handle this responsibility. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm just imagining things?" "Clara, listen to me," Sarah said firmly. "You are not imagining things. You're smart, you've done your research, and you deserve to be there just as much as anyone else. You need to fight for what's right." "I feel like I'm in over my head," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I ruin everything? What if Marcus is right?" "Then you gather evidence and prove him wrong," Sarah encouraged, her eyes blazing with determination. "You're not just doing this for Nathaniel. You're doing it for yourself, too. Think about what this could mean for your future. You can't let fear control you." Clara nodded, feeling a flicker of resolve ignite within her. "You're right. I have to push through this. I can't let Marcus intimidate me. I need to dig deeper. As the evening wore on, Clara returned home, her mind racing. The pressure of the situation began to weigh heavily on her, but she knew she had to gather more evidence against Marcus. She opened her laptop and started compiling all the financial records she had reviewed, highlighting the discrepancies and irregular transactions. Hours passed as Clara worked tirelessly, her eyes growing tired from staring at the screen. Just as she was about to call it a night, a chilling notification popped up on her phone. An anonymous message flashed across the screen. "Back off, or you'll regret it." Her heart sank. Clara felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. She stared at the message, her hands trembling. It was a warning, a clear indication that she was onto something dangerous. Who could it be? She muttered to herself, panic rising in her chest. Clara knew she had to be cautious. The stakes were far higher than she had anticipated. With every fiber of her being, she felt the urgency to push forward, but the threat loomed over her like a dark cloud. "I can't back down now," she whispered, trying to muster courage. "I have to find out the truth." As the night deepened, Clara wrestled with the fear that gripped her heart. She was no longer just a waitress. She was embroiled in a dangerous game of power and betrayal. With a steely resolve, she promised herself that she would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The weight of Nathaniel's legacy and her own future depended on it. Clara stood in the dim light of her small apartment, the weight of Nathaniel's world pressing heavily on her shoulders. The flickering fluorescent bulb above her cast shadows across the papers strewn across her kitchen table. Her heart raced as she reviewed the evidence she had painstakingly gathered, each document revealing a more tangled web of deceit than the last. The deeper she delved into Nathaniel's empire, the more she felt the icy grip of fear tightening around her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the room grew darker, mirroring the uncertainty that clouded her thoughts. The phone rang, breaking the silence and causing Clara to jump. She hesitated before answering, almost expecting it to be Marcus, the business partner who had dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. But it was an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Clara? It's Jake," came a voice, calm yet authoritative. Clara recognized him as the private investigator she had reached out to earlier. They had met briefly in a coffee shop, where he had listened to her story with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "Jake, I'm glad you called. I really need your help," Clara said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I gathered some information about Marcus and Nathaniel. Can we meet?" he suggested. "Yes, of course." "Where?" Clara asked, her pulse quickening at the thought of discussing the case with someone who could help her navigate this treacherous landscape. "Let's say the diner on Maple Street in 30 minutes. I'll order a coffee and a slice of pie." "You won't miss me," Jake responded with a hint of humor that lightened Clara's mood, if only for a moment. "Okay, I'll be there," Clara replied before hanging up. She quickly changed out of her worn-out clothes and into something more presentable, though she still felt like an imposter in the world of power and wealth she was about to step into. As she drove through the quiet streets, Clara's mind raced. What if Marcus found out she was investigating him? The thought sent chills down her spine. She had already received an anonymous threat, and she could only imagine what lengths Marcus would go to protect himself. But her resolve hardened. She couldn't back down now. Too many lives, including her own, depended on her getting to the truth. When she arrived at the diner, she spotted Jake seated in a booth at the far end. He was a rugged man with a scruffy beard and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Clara took a deep breath and approached him, trying to shake off the anxiety that clung to her. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Not a problem. I've been looking into Marcus for a while now, and I think you're onto something big," Jake said, taking a sip of his coffee. "What do you have?" Clara pulled out a folder filled with documents, her hands trembling slightly as she laid it on the table. "I found discrepancies in the financial records, payments that don't add up. And then there's this..." She handed Jake a page with a list of transactions that caught her eye. "This one shows a large sum transferred to an offshore account just before Nathaniel fell into the coma." Jake studied the document, his brow furrowing as he processed the information. This is serious, Clara. If Marcus is involved in financial fraud, he could be looking at jail time. But it's risky to confront him directly. I need to confront him. I can't let him get away with this, Clara insisted, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Let's take a step back. We need to gather more evidence before you go poking around, Jake replied, his tone firm yet understanding. Clara nodded, though impatience gnawed at her. I understand, but I can't shake the feeling that time is running out. If Marcus gets wind of this, then we have to be smart about it. I have some contacts who can help us dig deeper, Jake said, leaning forward, but we need to be careful. Marcus is not someone to be underestimated. As they continued to discuss their strategy, Clara felt a flicker of hope. With Jake's help, they could uncover the truth and expose Marcus for what he really was. She shared everything she had learned so far, and Jake listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions or insights that challenged her thinking. Do you have any idea what Marcus's endgame might be? Jake asked, leaning back in his seat, his eyes narrowing in thought. Honestly, I don't, but I've seen how ruthless he can be. When I confronted him about the discrepancies, he brushed me off like I was nothing, Clara replied, frustration evident in her voice. That's a red flag. He may think you're a threat, and that could make him dangerous, Jake warned, his expression serious. Clara felt her stomach drop at the thought. What if he tries to silence me? We'll make sure that doesn't happen. I'll be your eyes and ears. If anything feels off, you call me immediately, Jake assured her, his tone reassuring. But remember, you need to stay vigilant. Trust your instincts. As their conversation continued, Clara felt a sense of camaraderie building between them. For the first time since stepping into Nathaniel's world, she didn't feel so alone. They were in this together, and she was grateful for the support. Hours later, after laying out a plan to gather more evidence, Clara left the diner with renewed determination. But as she walked to her car, the weight of her situation crashed down on her once more. She glanced around, half expecting Marcus to appear from the shadows, but the parking lot was empty. The following days were a blur of late nights and early mornings as Clara and Jake worked tirelessly. They tracked down leads, interviewed former employees of Nathaniel's company, and pieced together a timeline that painted a chilling picture of betrayal. Each revelation felt like a step closer to the truth, but also deeper into a dark abyss. One evening, Clara sat at her kitchen table, exhaustion clinging to her like a second skin. The evidence was piling up, and yet the urgency of their situation only seemed to escalate. Just as she leaned back in her chair, the phone rang again. Anticipation coursed through her veins as she answered. "Clara, it's Jake. You need to meet me," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Where?" Clara asked, her heart racing. "The old warehouse by the docks. I found something that could change everything, but we have to hurry." "On my way," Clara replied, her pulse quickening. She grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, the chill of the night air hitting her like a slap. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette ominous against the moonlit sky. As she approached, she felt a knot of apprehension in her stomach. What had Jake discovered? Inside the warehouse, the air was stale and heavy with the scent of salt and rust. Clara's footsteps echoed eerily as she made her way deeper into the shadows. "Jake?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Over here," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. She rounded a corner and found him standing next to a table piled high with documents and files. His expression was grave, and Clara felt a shiver of dread. "I think I found the link between Marcus and Nathaniel," Jake said, holding up a file with a shaking hand. "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her heart racing. "Look at this," he urged, opening the file to reveal a series of emails. These messages show that Nathaniel was aware of Marcus's shady dealings long before the accident. It looks like he was planning to cut him out of the company. Clara's breath caught in her throat. But why didn't he do it? Why would he choose to keep him around if he knew? "That's the million-dollar question," Jake said, frustration evident in his voice. "But it makes Marcus desperate. If Nathaniel wakes up and realizes what's been happening, Marcus will have everything to lose." A sinking feeling settled in Clara's stomach. So, He'll do anything to stop us. Exactly. And we need to get this information to someone who can help before it's too late, Jake urged, urgency creeping into his tone. As they spoke, Clara's mind raced with the implications. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and the danger loomed closer than ever. She glanced around the warehouse, feeling a sense of foreboding. "We can't stay here too long. We need to figure out our next move," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Let's get out of here and regroup," Jake suggested, glancing toward the entrance. But before they could make a move, the sound of footsteps echoed from the entrance, and Clara's heart dropped. They weren't alone. Clara sat in Nathaniel's expansive office, the walls adorned with artworks that spoke of wealth and success. The mahogany desk before her was littered with documents, financial reports, and the remnants of a life she could scarcely comprehend. She felt like an imposter, surrounded by the trappings of a world that had always seemed tantalizingly out of reach. The weight of the responsibility thrust upon her pressed heavily on her chest, each breath a reminder of the gravity of her new role. She glanced nervously at the clock on the wall, its ticking echoing in the otherwise quiet room. It was a constant reminder that time was slipping away and decisions had to be made. Her phone buzzed, disrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her friend, Sarah, checking in. Clara hesitated before typing back, her fingers hovering over the screen. How could she explain the whirlwind her life had become, the secrets she was uncovering? "Hey, just trying to figure things out. I'll call you later," she finally typed, her heart racing. Setting the phone down, she turned her attention back to the documents. As she flipped through the pages, the numbers began to blur together. The more she dug, the more inconsistencies she found, irregularities that pointed to something much darker than mere financial mismanagement. Clara felt a knot tightening in her stomach. The implications were staggering. Nathaniel's empire was built on a foundation of deceit, and Marcus was at the center of it. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Marcus stepped in, his face a mask of feigned concern. "Clara, I've been looking for you. I wanted to discuss the estate's future," he said, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of something darker that sent a chill down Clara's spine. "Marcus," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was just going over some of the documents you sent. There are a few discrepancies I'd like to clarify." His smile faltered for a brief moment before he regained his composure. "Discrepancies? What do you mean?" "Nathaniel's accounts are impeccable. You must be mistaken." Clara met his gaze, refusing to back down. "I don't think I am. There are transactions here that don't make sense, and I want to understand why." "Clara, you're new to all this. Running a business isn't as straightforward as it seems. There are complexities. You wouldn't want to make accusations you can't back up, would you?" His tone shifted slightly, the friendly demeanor peeling away to reveal a hint of menace. "I have the evidence, Marcus. I'm not afraid to pursue this," Clara said, her heart racing. "Evidence?" He laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed in the plush office. "You think you can take on someone like me? You're in way over your head, Clara. Nathaniel trusted me to run things, not you." As Marcus stepped closer, Clara felt the room closing in on her. "I have to protect Nathaniel's legacy. If you're involved in something illegal, I won't stand by and let it happen." Marcus's expression darkened, and for a moment Clara saw the true depth of his disdain. "You really don't understand the game you're playing. It would be a shame if something were to happen to you or your family." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. Clara's heart raced as she realized just how dangerous her position had become. "I'm not afraid of you, Marcus," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. With a swift motion, Marcus turned on his heel and exited the office, leaving Clara trembling. The adrenaline coursing through her veins propelled her into action. She needed to gather her evidence, to prepare for what was coming. As she rifled through Nathaniel's documents, she resolved to confront Marcus again, but this time she would be armed with the truth. Days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and frantic research. Clara had become a ghost in her own life, neglecting her jobs and pushing aside her responsibilities. The weight of Nathaniel's legacy loomed larger than ever, and the urgency of her mission gnawed at her. She was no longer just a waitress trying to make ends meet. She was a woman fighting for justice, for truth, and for a man whose life hung in the balance. One evening, as she sat in her small apartment, poring over the last of her findings, she received an unexpected call from Sarah. "Clara, you've been distant. What's going on? You sound distressed," her friend said, concern lacing her voice. "It's complicated, Sarah. I'm dealing with something much bigger than I anticipated," Clara admitted, her voice shaky. "Bigger than what? You can't just keep shutting me out. I'm here for you," Sarah insisted. "I know, I can't explain everything right now. Just trust me when I say I have to do this," Clara replied, her determination surging. "You're scaring me," Sarah said, her voice softening. "Just promise you'll be careful. You don't know what kind of people you're dealing with." "I promise," Clara said, though in her heart she knew the danger was more real than she had let on. With her resolve renewed, Clara spent the next few days compiling her evidence, readying herself for the confrontation with Marcus. She felt a sense of clarity, a purpose that had been missing from her life. No longer was she just a victim of circumstance, she was reclaiming her narrative. Finally, the day of the confrontation arrived. Clara stood outside Marcus's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. The stakes were high, but she had come too far to turn back now. Stepping inside, she found Marcus seated at his desk, a veneer of calmness masking the tension in the room. "Clara, what a surprise. To what do I owe this visit?" he asked, his voice dripping with false hospitality. "I have something to discuss," Clara said, her voice steady. "I've uncovered evidence of your misconduct, and I'm prepared to take it to the authorities if necessary." Marcus leaned back in his chair, an amused smile playing on his lips. "You think you can intimidate me with your little stack of papers? I can assure you, Clara, you have no idea what you're up against." "I'm not afraid of you, Marcus. You may have controlled this empire with fear and manipulation, but I'm not like the others." "I won't be silenced," Clara declared, her voice rising with conviction. "Is that so?" he replied, his smile fading. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. The tension became palpable. Clara could sense the danger lurking just beneath Marcus's facade. "This isn't just about Nathaniel anymore. It's about everything you've built on lies. It's time for the truth to come out," she said, holding her ground. The air crackled with hostility, and Clara's resolve wavered slightly as Marcus rose from his chair, towering over her. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections, resources, and I can make your life a living hell." "Then do it," Clara shot back, her heart racing. "I'm not backing down. I'll expose you, Marcus. You can't intimidate me into silence." "Very well," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But remember, you brought this on yourself." With that, the confrontation escalated. But Clara managed to slip out of the office, her heart pounding in her chest. She had narrowly escaped, but now the urgency of her situation was undeniable. As she walked away, Clara's mind raced with thoughts of what came next. She couldn't let fear control her. She had to go public with her findings. The weight of Nathaniel's legacy was no longer something she could bear alone. She had a responsibility to the people affected by Marcus's corruption and to Nathaniel himself. Clara sat in her apartment, staring at the evidence laid out before her. It was time to take the final step to expose the truth. She picked up her phone and dialed Sarah. "I'm ready to go public," she said, determination flooding her voice. "Are you sure? This is dangerous, Clara," Sarah replied, her concern palpable. "I know, but I can't let fear dictate my life anymore. I have to stand up for what's right," Clara said, her heart racing with newfound purpose. "Okay, I'm with you. Just promise you'll be careful," Sarah urged. "I promise," Clara replied, knowing that this journey was far from over. She felt a sense of empowerment washing over her, a newfound strength that propelled her forward. As she prepared to face the world, Clara reflected on her journey. A waitress turned warrior, a woman who had discovered her voice amidst the shadows. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to embrace it, ready to fight for justice and ready to unveil the truth that would change everything. Clara stood at Nathaniel's bedside, the rhythmic beeping of the machines providing a haunting backdrop to the whirlwind of emotions she felt. Today was the day he was expected to wake up. The air was thick with anticipation, and her heart raced as she contemplated the myriad of truths she had uncovered during his absence. Weeks had passed since she had been thrust into this unexpected role, and each moment had reshaped her understanding of not only Nathaniel, but also herself. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers trembling slightly. Memories of her mundane life flickered in her mind, long shifts at the diner, the weight of unpaid bills, and the constant worry that had become her second skin. But now, standing in the sterile hospital room, she felt a strange sense of power. She had taken risks, uncovered corruption, and now she was here, waiting for the man whose empire she had momentarily controlled. "Come on, Nathaniel," she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. "Wake up." As if responding to her plea, Nathaniel's eyelids fluttered, drawing Clara's attention fully. With a sudden sharp intake of breath, he opened his eyes, confusion clouding his gaze. Where am I?" he croaked, his voice rough from disuse. "You're in the hospital," Clara replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "You've been in a coma for a while." She hesitated, unsure of how to approach the next part. I'm Clara. You appointed me as the executor of your estate." His eyes widened as he took in the room, the sterile white walls, the beeping machines, and finally Clara, standing nervously at his side. "Executor?" he repeated, his voice still hoarse. "Why would I do that?" Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I think it was a last-minute decision. You wanted someone honest, someone who could see things differently." Nathaniel furrowed his brow as memories began to flood back, the accident, the darkness, and the fleeting moments of clarity he had experienced while unconscious. "And you accepted?" "I did," she said, her voice steadying. "But it hasn't been easy. I found some discrepancies, some things that didn't add up." His expression shifted, a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Discrepancies, what do you mean?" Clara hesitated, the weight of her revelations pressing heavily on her. "I found evidence of corruption, Nathaniel. Your business partner, Marcus, has been involved in some unethical practices." A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face, his mind racing to connect the dots. "Marcus? I should have known. He's been ambitious for too long. But how much do you know?" Clara could feel the gravity of the moment. "I know enough to understand that the company is at risk, and you have to take control back. I confronted him and he didn't take it well. It wasn't safe." Nathaniel's gaze sharpened, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "You sought the truth while I was incapacitated. That's brave, Clara." "Brave or foolish," she replied, a hint of vulnerability creeping into her voice. "I didn't know what I was getting into. I just wanted to do the right thing." A soft smile tugged at Nathaniel's lips, surprising her. "You've done more than that. You've shown integrity in a world where it's rare. But there's something I need to tell you." He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "I was aware of everything while I was in the coma." Clara blinked, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I was conscious in a way, Clara. I could hear things, feel things. I knew you were there working tirelessly to protect what I built. Even if I couldn't respond, I orchestrated this whole scenario as a test to see who I could trust." Her mind raced as she processed his words. "A test? You knew I would find the corruption?" "Not just that," he continued, his voice steady. "I needed to see who would step up in my absence. I've been disillusioned by my previous associates. They were self-serving, and I wanted to ensure that whoever took my place could handle the truth of my empire." Clara's heart raced, a mix of disbelief and realization washing over her. "So this was all a part of your plan? You put me in this position knowing what I would face?" "Yes," he confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "And you've exceeded my expectations. You're not just an executor. You're the ally I've been searching for. Together, we can rebuild this company, restore its integrity." Clara felt a surge of emotions, relief, anger, and a sense of empowerment she had never experienced before. "You put me in danger, Nathaniel. I was threatened because of this." "I know," he replied, his expression softening. "But I also believe you have the strength to face these challenges. You've already proven that." "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm just a waitress. I didn't ask for any of this." "No," he said firmly. "You're more than that. You have vision, Clara. You see through the facade that many in my world hide behind. You have a choice now. Continue to fight for what's right, or walk away and let it crumble." Clara's heart raced at the enormity of his words. "And what if I choose to fight? Then I'll stand beside you. Together we can dismantle the corruption and build something new. You've already shown me that you can handle the truth." As Clara processed his offer, a sense of clarity washed over her. This was her moment, not just to reclaim Nathaniel's empire, but to reclaim her own life and purpose. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. "But this time, I won't do it alone. We do this together." Nathaniel's smile widened, and for the first time, Clara saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Then let's get to work." In that moment, Clara felt the weight of her past lift just a little. No longer was she just a waitress struggling to make ends meet. She was a woman on a mission, standing beside a man who had unexpectedly transformed her destiny. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, ready to confront the darkness that loomed over Nathaniel's empire. As Clara moved to the door, her heart swelled with determination. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her strength, and she was ready to embrace her newfound purpose. The world outside awaited them, and with Nathaniel at her side, Clara felt invincible.